The courtroom in Athens existed for one purpose: judgment. 500 citizens packed the wooden benches. Socrates stood before them, 70 years old, barefoot, his eyes bright with the unsettling curiosity that had made him famous and feared. He had one chance, one opportunity to soften his words, to weep, to beg, to remind the jury of his military service, his poverty, his family beyond the wall. He could have saved his life with a few sentences of humility, or what passed for humility, in the mouths of men who knew how to survive. Bronze. He looked at the men who held his fate and asked them what they meant by justice. The silence that followed was the silence of a room realizing that the accused had put his judges on trial, his accusers on trial, the very city of Athens on trial. This was the trial of philosophy itself. The question hanging in the air, heavier than the Athenian heat, was devastating in its simplicity. Why would someone choose death instead of abandoning the pursuit of truth? Why would a man refuse to save his own life if the price was silence? Palend, the paradox that will follow us across 24 centuries, the man who claimed to know nothing was about to become history's greatest teacher by dying. What kind of city builds a man who cannot bend? Manned Athens in the 5th century BC was unlike any other Greek city. Marble met mud. The Parthenon cast its shadow over fish markets. A citizen could debate the nature of courage in the morning and watch a tragedy in the afternoon that would dismantle every assumption he had made. It was a city intoxicated by its own voice, a democracy where any man could speak, where rhetoric was power, and where ideas were currency. Socrates was born into this world around by Chivers, BC, and he grew up in the humble quarters of Alopis, not far from the city walls, and he never left those quarters for the houses of the wealthy. He served as a hoplite in the Athenian army, marching in heavy bronze under the Peloponnesian sun, and by all accounts he fought with a courage that bordered on the reckless. At Potidaea, when the young and beautiful Alcibiades fell wounded in battle, Socrates threw himself through the enemy lines, lifted the bleeding youth onto his shoulders, and carried him to safety through a hail of spears. Those who witnessed it said he moved with a strange calm, as if the battlefield were merely another place to think. Years later, during another campaign, he was observed standing motionless in a field from dawn until dawn the next day, lost in contemplation while the army broke camp around him. He had seen something in his mind that required him to stay still, and he stayed. When the fighting ended, he returned to the agora, not to seek glory, but to stand in his worn cloak, his unusual face, bulging eyes, pug nose, thick lips, drawing stares from those who expected wisdom to arrive in a more beautiful vessel. He was poor by choice. He refused payment for conversation. He refused to found a school. He refused to write a single book. Everything we know of him comes through the hands of others. Plato, who loved him and made him a literary creation. Xenophon, the practical soldier who remembered him differently. Aristophanes, the comedian who mocked him as a fool dangling in a basket. Studying the heavens. Reconstructing the historical Socrates means looking through 3 mirrors, each faithful to its own angle, each distorting in its own way. A man who spent his life questioning the reliability of human knowledge would not have wanted to be captured too easily. Then something happened that forced him to take himself seriously. The moment that defined his mission began at Delphi. His friend Cherephan approached the oracle of Apollo and asked a question that seemed straightforward: who is the wisest man in Greece? The Pythia answered with a single name: Socrates. Most men would have returned home triumphant. Socrates was disturbed. He set out to prove the oracle wrong. He went to the politicians, men who governed the city and spoke of justice with great confidence, and he discovered that when pressed, they could not explain what justice actually was. He went to the poets, who spoke of love and virtue with beautiful words, and he found that they did not understand their own verses. He went to the craftsmen, who possessed genuine skill in their trades, and he watched them make the fatal error of believing that their expertise in one area granted them expertise in all areas. He questioned generals about courage, young men about beauty, priests about holiness. The pattern never changed. A man would claim to know something. Socrates would ask him to define it. The definition would unravel. The politician's justice collapsed into self-interest. The poet's inspiration dissolved into repetition. The craftsman's knowledge revealed its boundaries. Socrates did not humiliate them out of malice. He was testing the oracle's claim. Slowly, he understood. He was the wisest man in Greece, because he alone knew that he did not possess wisdom. I know that I know nothing. This is often quoted as a paradox or false modesty. It is neither. It is the recognition that wisdom lies in acknowledging its own limit. The mind that believes it has arrived has stopped moving. Intellectual humility is not the absence of thought. It is the refusal to let thought become certainty. Socrates, the midwife of ideas, understood that wisdom could not be poured into an empty vessel. It had to be drawn out painfully from the person who thought they already had it. This became his method. He would approach a man in the marketplace, ask an innocent question, and pull the answer apart, thread by thread, until the man saw the contradictions he had been living inside. A general would claim that courage is standing firm in battle. Socrates would ask, is it courageous to stand firm in a foolish cause? Is it cowardly to retreat from a battle that cannot be won? What if a man stands firm not from bravery but from ignorance of the danger? The general's definition would splinter. The man would leave angry or confused or, in rare moments, grateful. Socrates was not interested in winning arguments. He was interested in exposing the gap between what people believed and what they could justify. Most human evil flowed from this gap. Unexamined assumptions hardened into prejudice, cruelty, and self-deception. This led him to the statement that has outlived every building he ever stood in: the unexamined life is not worth living. But what does it mean for a life to be examined? He did not mean endless philosophical debate. He meant that a life driven by appetite, habit, the opinions of the crowd, and the fear of asking difficult questions has abdicated its highest possibility. To examine oneself is to ask whether one's anger is just, one's desires genuine, one's certainties earned. It is to treat the soul as something worth tending, something more important than wealth or reputation. Self-knowledge was not a luxury for the leisured class. It was the foundation of virtue itself. Virtue was not a list of rules. It was a kind of knowledge. Justice, wisdom, temperance, courage, these were not separate qualities but different faces of the same understanding, the understanding of what is truly good. Here is the puzzle Socrates left us. No one knowingly does evil. Absurd at first hearing. The tyrant who steals and kills does not want evil. He wants power, security, pleasure. He believes, wrongly, that these things will fulfill him. The liar does not want falsehood. He wants the advantages he believes it will bring. If a man truly understood what was good, if he saw with perfect clarity that injustice harms the soul, that dishonesty corrodes the self, that cruelty diminishes the one who inflicts it, he would not choose those paths. Wrongdoing is ignorance, the most dangerous kind. The ignorance of what makes a life worth living. This is not an excuse for evil. It is a call to radical education. It asks us to consider whether our own cruelties, our compromises, our silent complicities might be rooted not in malice, but in misunderstanding. It asks whether we have examined our own lives with the rigor we demand of others. What happens to a man who teaches a wounded city to question itself? Athens was changing. The Peloponnesian War had ended in defeat and humiliation. The empire that had made the city feel immortal had collapsed. The democracy Socrates had fought to defend had executed generals unjustly, turned on its own citizens, and finally surrendered to Sparta. The city that had been the beacon of freedom became suspicious of its own shadow. In this atmosphere, Socrates became a target. He had questioned politicians in public. He had attracted young men from powerful families. Alcibiades, who had betrayed Athens, Critias, who had become a tyrant. His enemies claimed he taught the art of making the weaker argument defeat the stronger. He had refused to participate in the city's religious festivals with sufficient enthusiasm. Most dangerously, he had taught young people to question authority. One moment sealed his reputation. When the 30 tyrants ordered him to arrest an innocent man named Leon of Salamis, Socrates refused. He simply went home. He would not be complicit in injustice, even when the command came from the city itself. 3 men brought charges: Meletus, a young poet with grievances; Anytus, a powerful politician whose son had fallen under Socrates' influence; and Lycon, an orator representing the artisans. The formal accusation was impiety and corrupting the youth. The historical reality was more complex. Athens was afraid. A city in fear does not distinguish between the philosopher who questions and the traitor who destroys. Socrates was no villain. His accusers were no fools. They believed, perhaps sincerely, that the stability of their wounded city required the silencing of its most famous critic. The trial took place in the spring, in the royal stoa, 500 jurors, 500 votes, 500 men who would decide whether philosophy was allowed to live. Socrates stood before them. He did not bring his family forward to weep. He did not beg. He did not soften his words. He reminded them of his poverty, of his service, of the debt the city owed him for forcing it to examine itself. Then he told them what he had been doing all those years in the marketplace. "I am a gadfly," he said. "The gods sent me to stir a noble but sluggish horse into wakefulness. Plan." But there was something else he wanted them to understand. He had never given anyone wisdom. He had only helped them give birth to it. Like his mother, the midwife, he had merely assisted. The truth had to come from within. If they silenced him, they were not silencing a teacher. They were silencing the labor of thought itself. He looked at the faces before him. To a man to fear death is to claim knowledge of what lies beyond. "I know nothing. Therefore, I do not fear what I do not understand." The jurors shifted on their benches. The votes were cast. They were counted guilty by a narrow margin. The jury waited for him to propose a serious alternative: exile, a fine, something that would let them spare his life without losing face. Socrates looked at them. He proposed free meals for life at public expense, as was done for Olympic victors. The silence was absolute. Then the murmurs began. Then the fury. The second vote was swift death. He did not flinch. A man who refuses to stop asking questions cannot survive in a world that demands silence. The execution was delayed. A sacred ship had departed for Delos, and by law, no executions could take place until it returned. Socrates waited in his cell. John Crito came through the door with money in his hands and grief in his eyes. The guards had been paid. The ship waited in the harbor, its sails ready, its captain silent. The path to freedom was clear. Socrates sat on the floor, his back against the wall. He looked at his friend. Crito knelt. He spoke of the children, of Xanthippe, of what the world would say. His voice cracked. "Think of what they will say. That you had the chance to live and chose to die. That you abandoned your sons." Socrates placed his hand on his friend's shoulder. "Would you have me survive by becoming someone else?" Crito had no answer. "If I flee, I destroy the laws that raised me, educated me, gave my father citizenship. I choose my life over the integrity of the city." But integrity is not a garment one removes when it becomes uncomfortable. It is the self. The oil lamp flickered. Outside, Athens slept. Inside the cell, two men talked until the lamp burned low. One wept. The other remained calm. It was the sound of a man choosing to be the same person in death that he had been in life. For 70 years, Socrates had examined his life. He would not stop now, simply because that examination had led him here. He would drink the hemlock because he had lived by principle, and principle demanded that he accept the law's judgment, even when the law was wrong. Evening came. The sun slipped behind the Hymettus mountains. The prison walls turned gold, then blood red, then gray. Socrates braved. And he said goodbye to Xanthippe. She wept. The children clung to his worn cloak. He held them, then sent them away. He did not want them to see what came next. His students gathered in silence. The air was heavy with the knowledge that something was ending. The poison arrived. Dembier, a small, ordinary cup. Socrates reached for it without hesitation. He looked at the young men around him, not students seeking answers, but people who had learned the courage to ask questions. Men he spoke of the soul, of things that outlived the body. His voice never trembled. Then he drank. Banda. The room fell silent. He walked for a while to help the poison spread. Soon his legs grew heavy. He lay down. The cold crept upward like a slow tide. At last he looked at Crito. "Tend, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. For 24 centuries, scholars have debated those final words. A thank offering for the cure of life, a final irony, a private promise fulfilled. The uncertainty is fitting." Bellier man, who spent his life living between questions, died in that same space. He examined his life until his final breath and faced the unknown the same way he faced everything else, by admitting what he did not know. He was no saint. He claimed to know nothing, yet transformed everyone who listened. He rejected wealth and fame. yet became immortal. He trusted reason above all, yet believed in a divine inner voice that warned him away from certain actions. These were not contradictions. They were the tensions of a man who understood that an honest life requires both conviction and doubt. And he was stubborn, difficult, sometimes merciless in his logic, but he never abandoned the belief that the soul mattered more than the body, truth more than comfort, and integrity more than survival. He changed the world without ruling a city, commanding an army, or writing a single book. Plato built an academy. Aristotle laid the foundations of logic, ethics, and science. Alexander carried Greek thought across the known world. Beyond, from there, the conversation spread through Roman forums, medieval monasteries, Renaissance libraries, Enlightenment salons, and into the classrooms, laboratories, and courtrooms of today. So why did Socrates choose death? Because to him, the body was never the thing on trial. Character was. The moment he agreed to stop questioning, he might have survived, but the person called Socrates would already have disappeared. And death was simply the final consequence of a life that refused to lie. That is why, 24 centuries later, we still remember him,